at Lazarus, aren't we? Now, this is really, of any part of the Bible, Lazarus is really the Shrek moment, isn't it? Because we remember, all of you who've seen Shrek know that one of the key parts of the story of Shrek is when he explains to Donkey what are ogres like. Ogres are like onions because they've got layers. And with Lazarus and with this telling of this story, we can see that this is that moment where there are just so many layers. I've read through this story I don't know how many times, getting ready for today, and almost invariably there's something else you see when you read through it, or something else I see. And now you could argue that's probably because you were a bit doughy, you didn't pick it up the first time through, and that's quite possibly true. But there's just it's such a rich and thought-provoking anecdote or parable or story or in a chapter in the life of Jesus. And one interesting little thing, before we really get into it, is that while it's perhaps the most well-known miracle of Jesus, where he says, and we'll look into this little part of it more as we go along, where his divinity, it can't be questioned. I suppose it can be questioned, but really is shown clearly. It's only found in one gospel. And other miracles are found in two or three different gospels. This is only found in John. And one of the possibilities for that as I was trying to research this, is because it's thought that Matthew, Mark and Luke didn't include it because Lazarus was still alive when they were writing, and they didn't want to bring any sort of kickback or persecution onto Lazarus or his family. That's one of the possibilities, but we don't know for sure. But to sort of start off there, in the 2nd century AD, around the year, or the end of the 2nd century, around the year 200, a rabbi called Ben, and it can either be pronounced Ben Kapara or Ben Kafra, stated that the spirit of the dead hangs around the body for about 3 days. Now, we don't know for sure if Ben Kapara was stating one of those things that everybody sort of thought at the time, or whether he was one of the first to actually sort of elaborate that idea. But it's thought that basically, we've got the writings of Ben Kapara, but he was just basically saying this kind of idea that was common in that Middle Eastern culture at that time. When someone dies, that their spirit is sort of near the body for about 3 days. Now you're probably wondering why I'm bothering to say that. Well, bear with me, keep that in the back of your mind as we go through. Now, can we have that first image there, please, Elric? Now, what I've tried to sort of show you how the story of Lazarus can be seen in so many ways, and of course, a picture tells 1,000 words. I thought, well, let's have a couple of looks at how this one story has been interpreted visually over the centuries. Now, this is a painting by Duccio Buonasegno from about 1310. And he is portraying the raising of Lazarus. And one of the things that there's a number of really interesting things here. Firstly, we see really clearly, because this is quite common at the time, Jesus is represented by a halo around him. So we know that's Jesus, and for somebody in 1310, that's kind of like a bold click on the font on a computer. That draws their eye immediately, and it's very, very clear who Jesus is here. And we notice that it's a sort of it's in daytime. We can see the trees in the background, and there's a couple of interesting things. I don't know how Lazarus, being so tightly wrapped up, has actually managed to get himself upright there. He's sort of, he must have been coming on. I don't know how he reckons that's occurred. And we notice how the cave, it still seems to sort of have that same shape as a lot of medieval kind of windows or doors, that sort of pointed shape there. And I can't work out this person. Down the bottom, they're sort of so overwhelmed, and all I can think of is that basically they're trying to face Jesus and focus on Jesus rather than on Lazarus. And there's a couple, heads turned, and the other thing that I do like about this one is that see the guy in the yellow here? He's got the hand over the nose, yeah, Lazarus, this is not going to be fun. You want that open, do you? Okay, so he's not a fan of this whole, he's sort of there you go, and you can see he's just going, oh no, what are we doing? Can we have the next one, please? Now, this is by an artist who I'm actually starting, and I know I sound like a real tosser, but I'm actually starting to like this stuff. This is by Michelangelo Caravaggio, who was through his life, and how he got away with this in the 1600s, I don't know. But he was a murderer. And I always thought that murderers sort of had a fairly short lifespan back in about the 1600s, but Caravaggio, he must have been an absolutely half off his head sort of guy. But we notice here with Caravaggio that 300 years later, what's he focusing on? Lazarus, he's not sort of tightly bound up like this now, is he? He's got the gear right off. And there's no one there going, oh no. And we see Jesus sort of almost in shadow, and the light is now shining on Lazarus. And that's the focus, and this guy was dead. And I also here, I really like this bloke, like he's really sort of, what on earth is going on here? He's just, I've seen it, but I don't believe it. Kind of thing. And now, and around the same time, next one, please, Eric, is Dutch artist Rembrandt. Rembrandt van Rijn. You might have heard of Rembrandt. He's different again, but again we see, and this is in the 1630s as well, that Jesus is very clear who Jesus is. But yet he's not really in the light, and there's a lot more darkness around us. But there is this, again, that Rembrandt puts the light on these people here who are just going, I see it and I do not believe what I'm seeing. Like this is, I can't get my head around it. And the guy at the back who's sort of sneaking his head around Jesus, that might be Thomas, I'm not sure, but he's sitting there, and up comes Lazarus, who's thinking, hang on, what's going on here? And the one that in many ways, when I first looked at it, I went, what? And I thought it was almost, but then as I sort of started to look at it, I thought, I think I like this the best of the four. If I can have the last one, please, Ori. This one is from only a little bit over 100 years ago, and those of you who sort of know would recognise this style. This is by Vincent van Gogh. And it's in the 1890s, and it was actually inspired by the previous one. But Rembrandt was a Dutch artist, as was Van Gogh. And Van Gogh paints this one basically as like a tribute to the previous painting. But you can see in a very, very different style. There's no, with Van Gogh's well, there's no darkness and sort of heaviness here. And the fascinating thing is that the people, he reinterprets the people who were in the previous painting going, what the heck? And apparently these were, and the people at the time knew this, these were women that he knew in, I think it's Arles, the town that he was living. And so he basically painted them in the picture, what it would be like for these women that he knew quite well to have experienced this. And I didn't like it at first, that I thought, well, where's Jesus? And Jesus is represented by the sun there. And I thought, well, that's a bit Aztec or something, isn't it? It's a bit sort of strange. What are you going on about, Vinny? And I knew that Vincent van Gogh cut his own ear off to try to impress a woman. I knew he wasn't probably the most stable of people who've ever lived. And I was going, oh, okay. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, isn't that a bit like C.S. Lewis? Because C.S. Lewis says, it's not that I can see God that makes me believe, but it's that by God I see everything else. And that with the sun, how are we seeing everything? Through the sun. The sun is illuminating everything. And in many ways, that's sort of, you think, hang on, the more I sort of thought about it, the more I thought, I actually really like that. I really like that it's not necessarily obviously Jesus, but by Jesus everything's getting illuminated. And that by bringing it into what was for him the modern day, he's looking at that whole thing of how would we have dealt with this? What if we were there? What if Mrs. Such and Such from the house next door and Mrs. Such and Such from down the road were actually there and they saw this? And I thought that was, again, we see those different interpretations. For some people, it's the shadow of death and in those images. For others, we've got to be looking at Jesus, and others go, no, it's through Jesus we see so much else. And just those different ways of viewing this one chapter of the life of Christ. Now, with that, if we could just leave that there too, because I quite like that. But if we just have a look at this and permit me to just elaborate a few things from this. And it's all in chapter 11 of John. And it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. Now, already we see John setting the scene here. And there's a couple of things. One is that it seems like even though he was God, that he knew these people. And he was, John is implying very strongly that Jesus was good friends with these people. Lord, the one you love is sick. And we notice here that Mary and Martha, the sisters, when they send word, well, for us to send word is text. For them to send word, they had to actually send someone. For them to send word, that actually took effort, that took energy, that took money. Because Jesus is some distance away and you've got to go find him. And you can see already in that sending word there's that sort of layer of desperation for these women. And they go, okay, Lazarus, go get Jesus. Well, where is he? Well, he's over in Judea somewhere. Or wherever it was over in Judea. Okay, so where do I just go find him? That might take days. And so this is not just, text them, see what they say. We can see that this is already something where we see the real humanity of this incident. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. And here John tells us directly, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. Now, if we look at this, there's a couple of interesting things. Firstly, and as we brilliantly saw in the little cartoon to begin with the water into wine, this is the 3rd incident in John where someone who knew Jesus and who loved him asked something of him. And what was his response was the same in each case. Wait. When Mary asked him in chapter 2, in chapter 7, and in chapter 11, someone who knew Jesus well, and it was made very clear, I think it was one of his brothers in chapter 7, it said it one of his brothers, his mother in chapter 2, and these Mary and Martha and Lazarus who love him. And in each case, that closeness of the relationship is made clear. In each case they asked something, and in each case Jesus said, hang on. It's interesting. And from the point of view, if we look at it from the point of view of the disciples, Jesus is very much out. Does he seem flustered? No. Oh, this will be right. It's for God's glory. And you can imagine the disciples sitting there going, okay, no biggie, we're good. You can imagine from Mary and Martha saying, they're going, because they don't know, nobody's sending them an email. why doesn't he come? Where is Jesus? Why doesn't he come? Where is he? And I can be pretty confident that every single person here has had an experience like that. Where is Jesus when I need him? Why isn't he helping? Where is he? You can imagine it from their point of view. And from Jesus, he seems very much in control. I'm going to do something great. Okay. And then in verses 5 and 6, the other very, very strong implication, it says there, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, not despite this, but so, when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed for 2 more days. It's like John saying he delayed not in spite of his love, but because he loved them. And that seems strange. And I must admit there have been times when I have been praying and been, feeling a great need where I must admit that it would feel very strange to me. So because you love me, you're not answering my prayer, you're not attending to, what's going on? But it's because, which seems to put pretty much everything that we would want, turn it on its head. Now we continue on. Because he says, okay, let's go back to Judea. Now the disciples to this point have been, okay. Here though, in verse 8, but Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? Now that would say, hang on, what's going on here? What is going on here? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. Now, I must admit, I've read over that again and again, and I still reckon that the disciples must have just sort of sat there amongst themselves just going. And nobody wants to ask because you don't want to be the dumb one like Peter who keeps asking. So earth, you can only imagine the faces there. And after he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. Okay, now the disciples had to keep listening. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. Fair enough. Then he told them plainly. See, Jesus knows what's going on. And Jesus is, again, we get this sense of Jesus being completely in control. Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. And basically Jesus is kind of saying to them, you think you know, but we're going to a whole nother level here, folks. This is going to be a whole nother level. And here's where, this is why I think one of the reasons why the Bible and then the Gospels have such a richness and a wondrous to it, because who's piping up now? One of the most famous, probably the second most famous disciple of all, Thomas. Doubting Thomas. But what does old doubting Thomas say? Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us go so that we may die with him. And that's why we see that these are real people. Did Thomas doubt? Is he known for that doubt? Yeah. But haven't we all? And did Thomas show courage? He showed courage like we would all probably wish that we would show. Let's continue quickly. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she says. And I really, really like that. Because here's Martha, who in another chapter of another gospel gets a hammering because, she was busy doing stuff and Mary chose the right thing to sit at the feet of Jesus. And so we often, I've heard many, many sermons about, don't be like Martha, be like Mary. But again, we see that these are real people. And Mary's sitting at home. but Martha's gone out to meet Jesus, and she has given this incredible declaration of faith. She said, and she this is a woman who's grieving, whose brother has been dead over 3 days, and who you would forgive her if she wasn't going, Jesus, where the heck were you? And yet she gives this astounding declaration of faith, and she says, I know that you can save him. And Mary's still sitting at home, and I see that here we are, we're dealing with real people who are living and learning and experiencing real grief and real frustration and real faith. And it is interesting here because remember what Jesus said back at the beginning. This will not end in death. Now Jesus knew that they were grieving. He knew that Lazarus is dead. He said it very clearly. And think of the point of view of Mary and Martha. Well, hang on. You knew this, yet Jesus allowed their grief to be extended. They grieved, which is one of the most wrenching of emotions. And yet Jesus allowed for that to be extended. They grieved for days. They had been grieving for days. They were shattered. And yet Jesus had allowed that in some ways. And we go, well, why? Why? And it's possible that maybe that was the cost of the miracle. Maybe that grief was the cost, and to deepen their understanding of his power and his grace. Let's continue. Yes, Lord, she replied, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world. And I think I'm right in saying that only Martha and Peter in all the Gospels actually make that declaration. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and he's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village and was still in the place where Martha had met him. He didn't go back. And here's one of the real interesting little themes of this. This is makes you wonder. And this is one of those things that for us, I think, is really important. Jesus had travelled, we don't know how many hours, how many days, but he'd travelled a long way. But then Martha and Mary had to make that effort to go to him. Mary had to still pack up and go to him. He was still waiting there. He didn't come back with Martha. Oh, Mary, look who's here. No. The teacher's here. Where? Well, back where I left him. Had to make that effort. And she's not the last person in this story to make that effort. And then it continues into what I think is one of the most perplexing and yet beautiful moments in the Bible. He had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Fair point. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and she saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. And the Jews said, see how he loved them. And it's an amazing contrast, isn't it? Here is Jesus, who is all to this point in time being so totally in control. Sickness will not end in death. He knows what's going to happen. And yet he stops there, and John makes it clear. He sees Mary, and he's affected by that. Look at what you've been through. And he shares that. So even though he's God, he's also human. Even though he knows this is what you've got to go through, there's a sharing of that as well. It's not like, I'm just putting you through this and I'm above it all. It's like, with that, now, we're going through this. Yep, you're going through this grief, and I'm going through it with you. And so that with Jesus we see this kind of strange duality that he's God and he's in control, but he's also human and he's with us. And he's feeling that pain and he's sharing that with us. But some of the Jews said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Brief answer, yep. Yeah, he could. And no, there's no criticism of that implied criticism in John's writing. Yeah, they're showing for, yeah, couldn't he have? Yeah, he could. He could. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odour, for he has been there 4 days." Now, a couple of things. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Rabbi Ben Kapara, let's say that he was right. He's been there. How long does the night that they have thought that the spirit of the body hang around? 3 days. How long has he been there? 4 days. So that no matter what, no matter whether you think in your psyche that, oh, well, yeah, maybe there's still hope. No. This is 4 days. Jesus, and in many ways it looks like that Jesus has delayed here 4 days. Why? Because there is no way, by anyone's thinking, in any way we're coming back from this. There is no chance. This cannot be oh, well, he just must have been, oh, well, it was his spirit just hanging around still, and that's all it was. This is 4 days. And as it says there, it said Martha, but by this time there'll be a bad odour. He's been there 4 days. And again, think back to our first image there with the guy said, oh, no, we're not coming back from this. But what does Jesus do? Does Jesus supernaturally move the stone like he does with his own? Or it appears his own resurrection? No. God's moved the stone. Again, they've got to respond. Again, the people, you've got a part to play. Again. Okay, move the stone. And you can imagine they're going, oh, great, this is going to be, why are we doing this? And here's one of the fascinating things. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. Now, isn't this just the thing? Jesus, at risk of his own life, what did Thomas say a few verses ago? You come back there, they tried to kill you. The first thing is that, and if we look at, okay, what about for us? Here is Jesus. Jesus has risked himself to be there. Jesus couldn't, even though he delayed, even though the grief was extended, Jesus couldn't, he was not prepared to just not go. He was almost, you could say, relentless in his, okay, I'm going at the risk to myself and my followers, I'm going. Yeah, come on. I'm going to pursue this. But here at the last minute, you're at the final hurdle. What does Jesus do? Does he actually go in and then, grab Lazarus and come on out and go, hey, look at this? He calls. Jesus calls. So he makes that, he pursued, it's almost like he pursued Lazarus, he pursued this miracle, and then asked, what do we need to do now? He calls. Lazarus responded. Lazarus had to respond. Now, let's look at this. No matter how badly you're going, the fact that you're here suggests you're better off than Lazarus. If Jesus expected Lazarus to respond and he's dead for that miracle, He's probably going to be saying to you guys, to me, to us, there's going to come a time you are going to have to respond. You're doing better than Lazarus, you've got to respond. And we note a couple of little details here too, that the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth round his face. Now, it's like in that first part, coming out there, but what does that show? He responded immediately. Lazarus didn't, he'd been better. He'd probably looked better and felt better. But he responds immediately, and those details are there. 4 days, you're not coming back from this. And then John makes the point of writing down the grave clothes. The stuff was still on his face. He was wrapped up. And so he responds immediately to Jesus. And we've got those grave clothes. And if the point needed underlining to all the people standing there, to those people who were, what the heck, the grave clothes were that further little just dotted I that this was a situation that was beyond redemption. This was a situation there was no coming back from, and yet, what happened? And I guess that one of the many layers that we could, for us, that we take out of this chapter in Jesus' life is that, what does it tell us? It's a great thing that we look at and go, there's Jesus' divinity on hand. But it tells us firstly that while we might be waiting, while things might be bad, that doesn't mean that Jesus is not on his way. It also means that there might be hurdles in his way, but he's not going to let a little thing like possible harm to him stop him getting to you. He will get to you. But the thing is that when he arrives, he's probably going to require a response. He will call, and we have to respond. And that's about all I've got to say about that.